A shadow that is not mine. I never thought that something like this could happen to me. My life was ordinary, even boring to be honest. I worked in a small design studio, lived in an old rented house on the outskirts of the city, and spent my evenings drinking coffee or scrolling through social media. But a few months ago, I started to notice things that turned my usual world upside down. I'd always been a bit paranoid. I wouldn't say I was afraid of the dark, but I always listened carefully for every rustle at night. My house, although cozy, had its own peculiarities. The floor creaked even if you just rearranged a chair, the door that constantly didn't close all the way, and the old windows through which the slightest breeze made the curtains move. It would seem like nothing special, but it created an atmosphere that always kept me a little tense. I first noticed it in the middle of autumn. It was already quite cool, and the sun was setting early. One evening after returning from work, I decided to do some work at home. I spread out my papers on the kitchen table, turned on the lamp, and immersed myself in my work. When I looked up to reach for my coffee cup, I noticed something strange. The shadow that was supposed to be mine didn't quite follow my movement. At first, I thought it was an old lamp that was perhaps blinking in a way that I couldn't see. But when I deliberately leaned toward the cup, the shadow froze for a split second before repeating my movement. It was as if it was thinking before imitating me. I shrugged, thinking about what I'd imagined, and went back to work. But the feeling that something was wrong didn't leave me. The next time it happened a few days later. This time, I was watching TV in the living room. The room was semi-dark, only the TV screen cast soft blue light on the walls. And again, my shadow didn't match my movements. When I reached for the remote, she paused for a second, then, as if belatedly, repeated my action. I decided to check. I got up and walked around the room, moving my hands like a child playing with its own reflection. The shadow echoed me fine at first, but then these weird delays started happening again. She seemed to be living her own life, as if something was trying to pretend to be my reflection, but it was doing it imperfectly. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just my imagination. But the following days turned into a series of small but disturbing observations. The shadow behaved more and more independently. Sometimes I saw her in the wrong place when the light fell from the right. She could appear from the left. Or when I left the room, it seemed that she still remained, as if something forgot to follow me. One day, I decided to record it all on video. I put the phone on a tripod and turned on the camera, pointing it at me. For several minutes, I moved around the room, waving my arms, spinning in place. Everything seemed fine until I looked at the recording. The video clearly showed my shadow stopping when I was moving and, worst of all, moving when I was standing still. Panic washed over me like a wave. I turned off the camera and turned off the lights in the room, leaving me in total darkness. I thought that I would never see this again. But the darkness brought even more fear. In complete silence, I heard a slight rustling. It was a sound that could be mistaken for the rustling of leaves or the sound of a light wind. But I didn't have the windows open, and I knew for sure that there couldn't have been anything in the room that could have made that sound. I took the next day off and decided to go away from home to collect my thoughts. I went to a park on the edge of town. Autumn was in full swing, and the trees were blooming in all shades of yellow and red. It helped distract, but not for long. As I stood by the lake and looked at my shadow in the water, I noticed that it was not moving at all like it should. I felt that something was following me, and this something was not external. It was inside me. As I walked home that evening, I felt a strange tension, as if someone was following me the whole time. Although the streets were almost empty, I turned around several times to make sure that no one was behind me. But the feeling did not go away. It seemed that my movements were being duplicated by something invisible, step by step, but at a distance that I could not determine. It was even worse at home. The shadow, which had previously behaved strangely, now began to act completely independently. I noticed it by the window when I was alone at the kitchen table. It was not where it should be, and, most importantly, it no longer repeated me. I sat in the corner of the room with the lights off, holding a flashlight in my hands. I was afraid to move, afraid even to breathe, because every movement I made now seemed like an invitation to this creature. But the more I tried not to pay attention, the more I felt its presence. The shadow began to appear where it could not be under any circumstances. On the ceiling, on the walls, in corners where the light didn't fall. It seemed separate from me, alive, yet attached to me. I wasn't sure anymore if it was my shadow or something else entirely, pretending to be it. I didn't sleep at all for several nights. I left every light in the house on, hoping the bright light would make the shadow disappear. But it didn't. Sometimes I saw it in the periphery of my vision, as if it was deliberately trying to avoid direct view. On the fourth night, something happened that I still can't explain. The lights in the entire house suddenly went out. I rushed to the switches, but they didn't work. The light from the flashlight seemed too weak to illuminate the room completely. That moment I heard a sound that still haunts me in my dreams. It was the sound of footsteps, but not mine. Footsteps approached from the corridor. I stood there clutching the flashlight in my hands, and suddenly I felt the shadow return again. She no longer tried to hide. She was standing in front of me. It wasn't just a shadow. Her features were similar to mine, but they looked distorted, like someone had drawn me but forgotten to add key details. Her arms were too long, and her head seemed to be tilted to the side, making direct contact impossible. She didn't move. I couldn't either. We faced each other as if in a kind of duel, where victory meant something more than mere survival. Suddenly she started to move. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. She was coming closer, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. Her arms reached forward, and before I could do anything, she had me covered. I cannot describe what I felt at that moment. It was like falling and flying at the same time. The world around me froze, and I found myself in a darkness that was greater than any night. I felt something draining out of me, a part of me leaving my body and disappearing into infinity. When I came to, it was already morning. The sun was shining through the windows, and everything looked perfectly normal. I saw no shadow, no hint of what happened that night. But I don't feel like myself anymore. Something inside me changed. Sometimes when I walk past a mirror, it seems like my reflection is watching me. And when I go outside and see my shadow, I notice that it doesn't look quite the same as before. She is now moving a little faster than me.